This is it, the big one. This might be Marvel Snap's biggest OTA ever. It is a full rework to what the metagame is. First things first, Shou Lao going from a 5/6 plus 3 to a 5/8 plus 2. This puts Shou Lao more firmly in the realm of a card that is similar to a Darkhawk with more ways to intensify the bonus. I think that Shou Lao could still end up being a very powerful output-based card. The two Shou Lao decks that I'm looking at specifically are Jocasta and Ongoing Shou Lao. Both of them we'll have to talk about a bit later because there are other changes that impact this. Remember, I said this was and is one of the most impactful OTAs ever. Just in terms of Shou Lao, I think that this is a fine thing to do. They tried the +3. There were too many things that made it a little too good. It is reasonable to make Shou Lao more of a lane-winning threat on his own and encourage people to play maybe a little bit more of a small ball Shou Lao thing rather than focusing entirely on doubling up his output off of his on reveal. This is a much more normal Marvel Snap card now, but those ways of doubling output still exist. Shou Lao seems like he would still likely be a part of future Jocasta-based decks because of how good he is with activate cards like Maverick and Scarlet Spider. The intensification of his buff by Jocasta doubling it again does seem like the kind of interaction that will still likely be key to Shou Lao's output. He just won't be sitting and lording over every other mid-range deck in the entire game when he does this. His flexibility is going to be the most interesting thing about him. There have been 3, 4, 5 different Shou Lao decks, all of them doing different kinds of things because of his baseline power. That might not be true now. We might not actually be in a situation where he can do whatever and just be better than the other things in the mid-range class. This is now a card that we might actually have to build around. So if you're looking to build around Shou Lao after the OTA, I would investigate the Jocasta build with all the activates or the Captain Carter build with all the ongoings. Starlord is taking a massive nerf here. He's been nerfed multiple times. This, to me, feels like the biggest nerf of them all, and I don't want to be too down on it. I expect this to be the kind of nerf that the community is very happy about, but I have very mixed feelings about Starlord and about what it is that I learned about Marvel Snap because of Starlord and all of that stuff. But baseline, I do think that this is a nerf that risks killing the Starlord deck as we know it, and I think that the difference between what my take on that might be and the larger community take on that is that the community take on that is that that is good and the deck sucks and it shouldn't exist, and my take on that is that I keep thinking about a hypothetical person in my head who built the Starlord deck, played Marvel Snap with the Starlord deck, doesn't have the cards to play anything else, and then they nerf the deck disappears, and they can't play the game anymore. And I think that, like, the balance between those two things is largely the line that this patch is trying to ride. I worry that it's very possible that this overdoes it for what Starlord is. For those who are listening just on audio, he is losing a point of power, and he is no longer maintaining the ability to gain power equal to the amount of energy he is creating. This is a big nerf for a variety of reasons. Just the baseline, it takes between 14 and 16 power out of Starlord's output when you are playing him as a combo card. Just as a straight up baseline, if you are Arnim Zola-ing Starlord, that is now 16 power less than it previously was most of the time. If you are Grandmaster and Absorbing Manning Starlord, that is now 14 power less or so than it was. It's a big deal. Like, it's a seriously big deal. You go from playing a Starlord at 5/8, gaining the power for maybe 3 energy. That power is now gone, so that's -4 there. The Grandmaster copying it, that's -4 there. The ability to Absorbing Man it, that's -4 there, plus the 1 point of power. Maybe it's even more than that. It is double-digit power loss in most situations that you end up playing this card out. And I think that is really significant. I find it hard to think of a card that has been more seriously nerfed than this while maintaining its identity. Like, there have been cards like Eliath, when Eliath deleted everything, going from that to silencing everything. That was a major change that probably is a bigger change than this. Blob going from being uncapped to having a cap, probably a bigger change. This feels like a really big deal to me, and I really hope that I'm wrong about this, but I think the community largely reacts to this with feeling like I'm an idiot and that they should kill this deck, which is a really interesting dynamic because I think the thing I learned from Starlord mostly was that they just shouldn't push stuff that doesn't have answers to it in the form of things like Mobius or Stardust. Whenever they make one of these weird combo decks, what it does is create this feeling of helplessness, which is bad because it means like your player base doesn't really have the ability to feel like they can do anything about this. I've talked about Archangel disease, which is what I consider the term for this sort of inbuilt amount of just community dislike that builds up to a point that a card is just enraging to the community, even if it's not very good, if it's playable at all. And I have applied that term to Starlord in the past. And I think what's interesting when you think about what Loki and Archangel and Starlord all have in common, it's that there's not a tech card you can really run for them. Remember, Loki came out before Mobius did. Like, a lot of this is about the feelings of something being done to you that you have no functional recourse for. And it's frustrating because Mobius and Stardust and Luke Cage, those are all cards that feel that way the other way. Oh, my opponent played Stardust, my deck doesn't work, right? So balancing those two things is a really complex thing. And it is weird to say that, like, my learning from Starlord was basically, they need to have inbuilt answers in the game here. They need to have that card that they data mined that is going to be able to answer things that have too much energy before making the Starlord. And I don't know how I feel about that as like a balanced philosophy, but it definitely would have alleviated a lot of the problems if people felt like there was something they could have done to deal with this combo in meaningful ways. And I really do think that, like, that is one of the real learnings that I've gotten from this. The fact that they've had to, like, deal with this sort of accrued negative sentiment, and it's led them to this point. I can't help but imagine that things would be better. It would be a better world if that card already existed and wasn't coming out in June. Fang Foom is getting 2 points of power, but his on reveal is getting pretty drastically nerfed. His on reveal now gains the power of 1 front row enemy card with no specific targeting. I think this is likely an over nerf to Foom, but I also think that it's probably a correct thing to do. If you think about the budget of power allocation, most of Fang Foom's power was located in his on reveal, and the premise of the card is that it's a 7-cost card, so we gotta put a lot of power into it. When most of the power of a 7-cost card is in the on reveal, that on reveal says something pretty close to win a lane. That makes sense to me. That is all probably true. The problem is that when the budget of the card is allocated towards that on reveal, and that on reveal kind of says win the lane because that's what the identity of the card is, it becomes very profitable to duplicate that on reveal, which is largely where Foom's problems lied. This was a card that was an Arnim Zola target. It was a Grandmaster target. It was an Absorbing Man target because so much of the budget of this card's power was allocated to the on reveal. I think it is a correct decision to allocate less of the power to the on reveal and more of the power to the body. But I worry that they didn't put enough power back on the body such that now Fang Foom might actually just not be a card that actually has an identity anymore. I think maybe they aimed a little low. They gave 2 points of power back in exchange for taking away probably more than 2 points of power if you're just playing Fang Foom fairly, and taking away the big upside of what the card was, which is an on reveal that says win the game, so I could duplicate that on reveal a lot, right? So I do wonder if maybe they came in a little low on Fang Foom. I would understand if they did that on purpose, of course, because you really don't want to be in a situation where you nerf Starlord like this, you nerf Fang Foom like this, and it still ends up being a good thing to do. You want to make sure that this is dead because you're making the changes to say, like, we don't think this is a healthy play pattern for the game. We would like things to change. And I think that is a reasonable approach to it. Just, this is one of those cards where I wouldn't be surprised if in a couple months they ended up circling back and he's got 14 power. You know what I mean? Normally we talk about these function changes towards the end, but I think this is an important function change to point out here. Now, there is going to be a change to how multiplicative scaling works in Marvel Snap, and I do consider this to be quite a big one, largely for its impact on Invisible Woman First Steps, but also on Onslaught and Wong. The way this will work is now all of these things will make something happen one more time, rather than doubling them. So for example, if you have a Wong and a Mystique, that will now make the on reveals that happen in that lane happen 3 times rather than both of them doubling it. If you have an invisible woman and an invisible woman, and you activate those invisible women, they will now each apply an additional +1 rather than doing that weird thing that led them to get +4 off of having 2 procs of Invisible Woman. The only card that is in this cohort that is not affected by this, interestingly, seems to be Jocasta. That's very weird. But when you think about how Jocasta is worded, it actually makes sense. Because what Jocasta is doing when she's in a lane with another Jocasta is simply activating that other Jocasta again, which is how she works. She is actually only adding +1. And then the other Jocasta activates her again. And then the loop stops. And there's not really like a wording change that can meaningfully stop it from doing that. It's just how she works compared to how something like Wong works. So what I'm wondering about is, first of all, is the Invisible Woman First Steps deck completely gone? That is a very real question to me. And if so, will they need to compensate it with power in a future world where Havoc goes back to like +4, Invisible Woman First Steps goes back to being a 3/5? All sorts of things like that are definitely a big question in my mind. The second thing that comes to mind here is Jocasta now the strongest of the doublers? Because all the other ones are now sort of much more linear. She still gets to do her little extra stacking thing. And that is a quite interesting dynamic in a world where they just nerfed Shou Lao, but now the other half of the Shou Lao Jocasta deck, Jocasta, got a lot stronger relative to what other people are doing in that space. And I'm kind of wondering if we go from a world where Shou Lao was dragging Jocasta with him to relevance to a world where Jocasta Scarlet Spider stuff is dragging Shou Lao with her to relevance. It's definitely something that comes up. There are a bunch of things going on here that are all sort of minor compared to that stuff, but probably major in the context of how this works. You know, I wonder what will happen to Living Tribunal. I don't know how many Iron Men is enough to win a lane, or enough to generate enough points to win all 3 lanes. That might be a deck that is in serious trouble here. I don't have a good mental model for what it would end up being on certain draws, and whether or not your nut draws are just totally gone now. The decks that are copying Mr. Fantastic a bunch by doing Onslaught Prodigy stuff, the ARMS decks as they're colloquially referred to, I think those decks might just go away entirely. The kind of things where you're like doing Wong Mystique, I think they might stick around. A couple interactions that are unchanged, like Wong and New Kang Ramatut that'll still be 12, but Wong Mystique New Kang will be slightly less. Like it's a very odd thing to try to mentally model, but largely I think Onslaught and Wong are not particularly huge slices of the metagame, especially when you're doing like Onslaught Wong or Onslaught Mystique and Wong Mystique, things like that. I don't think those will have major impacts. The biggest things to me that stand out about this change are specifically the Invisible Woman stuff and whether or not that changes Jocasta's role as a doubler by being the one that isn't hit by this. I think the rest of these changes are fairly non-controversial. Agony going to 1/2 feels like kind of a free space on the bingo card. They're making a ton of buff cards. Agony was already really good. There's no real reason why it shouldn't be at 1/2 compared to 1/3. This seems like a very easy nerf to make that probably could have been in the can for any of the last 6 OTAs. If it had showed up, I'd have been like, yeah, that's fine. And now here we are, and I'm like, yeah, that's fine. Martyr going to 6 power is at least non-zero interesting. The contexts in which Martyr is actually played tend to be contexts where you're removing her text with techno-organic virus, or contexts where she's being played so you get priority when playing Wave into Galactus. That stuff seems relatively compelling to me. Like, I don't think it's like the wrong direction for those decks to go. It's a very plausible line, and I think that she will still perform her role well there. What I'm wondering is if there's enough of a way to fuse that stuff into decks that have been traditionally pretty good. Like, can I play super giant techno-organic virus with Martyr? Is that a viable thing for me to do? I can sort of see a world where I would really want to be doing that. That's a really compelling direction. That's a 1/6. You're super interested in that in a deck like that. I can absolutely see being that kind of deck and trying to do something real in the metagame with Martyr, because I think a lot of where she tends to see play is decks where it's not particularly real. But if you're being able to remove her text or filling up the board or caring specifically about having priority for a specific turn, she might end up just being worth putting in your deck at 1/6, which is quite compelling for a card that has basically never been worth putting in your deck. Martyr's mirror, Captain Marvel, is a very reasonable buff to just keep her in line with Martyr. She could very easily get this help. There's no real problem with it. It also helps with the upcoming card Daredevil Shadowlands, which is a card that keys off drawing 6 power cards in your deck. Both of these now going to 6 power should allow them to be run in decks with Daredevil, although I'm not convinced that is a serious gain for either those cards or for Daredevil. Captain Marvel is a card that has not seen a lot of play recently because of how combo-centric the meta has been. With nerfs to Shou Lao, Starlord, and a lot of doublers, maybe we're not in that world anymore, but I still find it hard to believe that I'm very happy about playing a 4/6, even if it is a 4/6 wherever I want it. Maria Hill to 1/3, I would say, is just a great change that puts her in sort of that Nightcrawler range of I'm just happy to play this card in any deck that really cares about it. I can see myself playing this in a V-Hand deck. I can see myself playing this in a Supergiant deck. All of that makes sense. Just a good, solid 1/3 that I am happy to put onto the board and happy to put into my deck. This is a big quality of life upgrade because it makes her an actual card that I would think about playing, as opposed to a card that I never in a million years think about playing. Just 1 point of power goes so far on these 1-cost cards, and we've seen it happen with Nightcrawler. It's a big deal. And while I don't think Maria Hill will hit exactly the Nightcrawler zone, I do think she's maybe just a little bit below it, and she maybe has a few more hooks. Last up, Archangel getting a point of power on his base and an additional point of power on his effect. This is probably a solid card now. I find it hard to believe that something that does stats this well just isn't very good. It's got the vanilla stat line plus the ability to give you 5 more power and maybe an on reveal later. It's just gonna be a pretty solid thing to do. It's really just a question of the decks you play it in. Archangel's big issue is lack of decks, and I don't know that making him stronger necessarily fixes that, but it is kind of an interesting direction for them to go, because instead of saying we want him to be, you know, better elixir or whatever, they're like, no, this guy's good. You got to figure out how to make him work, though. We're going to make him more rewarding. We're going to make him a better card when he doesn't work. But if you're going to put him in your deck, you still need to figure out a compelling case to make. And I think that's a pretty reasonable design decision, personally. I'm interested to see how this OTA goes over. I suspect that I will be a little more negative on it than the community will be. Largely, the sentiment I've gathered from the community is that they really hate Starlord, they really hate Shou Lao, they feel like the game feels stale, they want something to change, let's just make some change for the sake of there being change. And I don't disagree that, like, as a person who plays the game a lot, as a person who does content on the game, that's something that I, the person, feel. But I do think that, like, in as much as I think about what is good for the game, I'm not as sure that doing balance like that is good for the game. And I think I'm really interested to see how people feel about this, because, again, my thing is basically always that I don't think it's a good idea for them to nuke archetypes, even if those archetypes are bad. And I do think they nuked Starlord here. And I agree, Starlord is it's a bad deck to have around. But I keep thinking of, you know, little Timmy, who's wanted to play a big dragon, and so he made the best Fang Foom deck, and now he's out of tokens, and now he can't play Marvel Snap because that's what he used his tokens on. And I think that's always the risk with making balance changes like this. Like, obviously, my audience trends people who play a lot, right? Like, people who care about the game, people who play a lot. And so those people are more likely to get bored sooner and more likely to be sort of more involved in the end game of the game. And while I realize that, like, a lot of the feedback I get on this is going to be like, you know, KM, I think you're underestimating how much this card sucks. I don't really think that I am. I'm just very concerned with, I know it sucks. I just think that it's really hard to make a call like this. And I'm very surprised that they did. Largely, I expect that the community writ large, like the people who are engaged enough in Marvel Snap to, like, be on the Discord or be in my Discord or be in my comments, they'll love this because that's who it's aimed at. But I do think there are, like, attendant concerns here that are notable to me. I am largely, you know, generally pretty happy to see things change. I just think they went pretty drastically at Starlord and Fang here in ways that I wish were more evenly distributed over the whole Starlord deck, personally. We'll see how things end up shaking out. I am interested to see what your reaction is, so let me know in the comments, and please try not to be too mean to me. As always, have a wonderful evening. I've been KMBest, you've been phenomenal, and I'll see you in the next one.